Gurr Margaret Laskin Corla, and I also want to welcome the bill, and certainly the Social Democrats will be supporting it. The issue of this bill is very much tied into what's been happening around students' accommodation needs, and this is one example that's been highlighted very well by Deputy Mairead Farrell, but it's one of many examples of just exploitation of students when it comes to housing. And there seems to be a view, perhaps not intentional or explicit or anything like that, but actually if you look at student accommodation across a number of sectors, you see that it's actually just open season for students to be exploited when it comes to the housing crisis. And perhaps inadvertently, but the government last week when we were discussing the bill brought forward to regulate student digs, the government in their response were actually reinforcing that, because the government were putting forward the case of, well, look, maybe we shouldn't regulate this area because it might affect supply, even though the government wouldn't put that case forward not to regulate an area to protect people if they took the rights of students to need protection seriously, like other sectors. They just wouldn't put forward that argument. Regulation, protection of rights is good enough for others, but somehow government and others think when it comes to students, well, maybe not. Pushed into doing this bill, welcome that it is being done, but pushed into doing it none the same. We've been raising for a considerable amount of time issues that are affecting students in terms of housing and their exploitation. One, for example, is the flouting of RPZ rules by a number of student accommodation providers who effectively get around the rent increases by bringing forward additional charges, service charges and whatnot, as a way of increasing and jacking up the rents and flouting the rent pressure zone rules around legal rent increases. I brought that up with the Minister and the Senior Minister here, but we haven't seen proactive action from the government on this. The response from the government, in fact, has been, oh, well, if a student has a problem, bring a case to the RPZ, which really isn't good enough to place the burden of breaches of the law on individual students. The idea that an individual student may be renting for the first time, could be in this country for the first time, could be in college in first year or whatever, the idea that they have to be the one that goes up against a corporate landlord that's breaking the law in terms of circumventing it, putting in these additional charges, and the government won't be proactive on it. Again, reinforces it's the same attitude of, well, it's students, it's kind of open season to exploit them. We don't take protecting their rights as seriously as we should. And indeed, that whole area has been very well documented by the Dublin Inquirer and Lois Capella in particular. And it shouldn't be up to good independent journalism, of course, to expose these things. There should be proactive response from the government. We've seen huge exploitation of students in terms of rental scams and fraud. We've had the international Oireachtas, the International Council for International Students, has documented and highlighted a lot of the exploitation that's going on. We've seen the issues around sex for rent exploitation, especially international students being one of the groups that's been affected by this. The survey by Oireachtas has found that 5% of international students have been offered accommodation in exchange for sex, or indeed seen ads advertising rooms in exchange for sex. And 55% of international students' mental health has been impacted due to the accommodation crisis. And of course, we've been raising on this side of the House for the last number of years the need for robust legislation in this area. And the government has promised to bring forward robust legislation, but now we're really probably weeks away from this government still being in office, and there's no sign of that legislation. It simply hasn't been done, hasn't been a high enough priority for this government, despite the promises by this government that it would act on it, and despite the fact that the government has seen fit not to allow legislation from our side of the House to progress sufficiently. We hear talk correctly, and I think it's absolutely genuinely meant from people in leadership in this country about a zero tolerance when it comes to sexual attacks, sexual violence and sexual exploitation. And I genuinely believe that is absolutely meant, but that has to be followed up then when it comes to exploitation, for example, of students, sex for rent, has to be followed up by strong, robust legislation here. And the promises of it, I mean, at this rate, the students, for example, who are getting exploited in this way and are having to deal with this, and you know, they, by the time this is going to be dealt with legislatively, they may well be, you know, through their college education. Of course, it affects people as well in terms of their ability to stay in education. People do, unfortunately, drop out as a result of the different forms of exploitation. As I've said previously, when it comes to addressing student accommodation, you know, it would be better than having all these private providers that are exploiting students in this way. And indeed, it has happened that there's colleges do this as well. They see students as some sort of a cash cow, student accommodation, some sort of a cash cow to, you know, to avail of, to meet deficits in their funding. It would be better than having that. It would be much better to have a good, strong, affordable student accommodation provided by the state or the not-for-profit sector, or indeed through colleges, but on an affordable basis, not on a basis of here's a group of students that we can try and charge maximum rents for to help with college income. That would be what needs to be done. And while we've had 4,500 beds promised and announced by Simon Harris when he was the minister in this area, we've seen a real lack of delivery here. And I've previously called for the need for a borrowing framework for colleges to be put in place, so that where we have land, where we have planning permissions, and where we have a clear need for student accommodation, so that can be put in place. But without the government putting in place a borrowing framework on this, we aren't getting shovels in the ground. And of course, this would help alleviate some of these forms of exploitation alongside the measures of this bill. And we do have a lack of a sense of urgency from the government on this. And I have previously referenced, for example, the 358 beds at Dartry, which Trinity College want to bring on stream. But indeed, there's a lack of engagement from the government on that in terms of the financing. So if we had those kinds of actions in tandem with the measures in this bill, in tandem with regulating digs, because yes, students who pay money in digs deserve some protection from the law, of course they do, and the government's failure to act there is not acceptable. If we had that, we'd have a considerably better situation. And also, if the government were doing that, it would send out that message, I think, to the wider society. It is not open season to exploit students in terms of their accommodation, but this lackadaisical approach from the government, who've finally been pushed into action in this area, I think hasn't helped. And of course, this comes at a cost, not just to students and their accommodation needs, but if we had a good, strong, not-for-profit or affordable student housing sector, of course, this would take pressure off the private rental sector. It would mean that people who are would be less likely to be evicted out of the private rental sector into homelessness. And we've had the reports over the weekend of the really dire situation that's having on children in particular. Leading paediatrician in Ireland has given detailed account of the kind of what she's now seeing. She's seeing children presenting with rickets, malnutrition, stunted growth, simply not growing at the level that they should for their age, skin diseases including scabies, and particular effects on children with intellectual disabilities, autism, in emergency accommodation where there's a huge amount of noise and disruption, particular effects on them and their trauma. So failing to deal more comprehensively with our student accommodation crisis is not only affecting students, but it's also having a wider effect. And it is one of the contributory factors then to children ending up in those dire situations in homelessness. And so they need to be addressed, Margaret.